Te tio, te huka, te hauhu, te hei, Māori. Apologies received one. And I'll move the grant. Those in favour say aye. Nation of and I'll move the affirmed. Can I those in favour say aye. And disclosures of interest of any minutes, nation of minutes of any and I'll move the minutes of aye. Page 4.1 government be asking
Chair. This is a follow-on from many meetings we had during the Joint Committee through the Submission Working Group completed and lodged 4 submissions across 5 legislative reform areas, being the rates targeted model proposal, the emergency management bill, simplifying local government proposal, and the planning and natural environment bills. So those were the reforms that they all have direct impact on the group and they align with the agreed priority reform areas. So all the submissions that were endorsed at the time and lodged are attached. So that's for a matter of public. So it's out in the public so everyone can see everything that was done. And there is another matter further to the rates targeting model. NEMA's confirmed it cannot escalate the Joint Committee's concern raised at your December meeting. But if the rates target model proceeds as drafted, councils may not be able to meet their obligations under the new emergency management legislation. So there is a recommendation that the Joint Committee agrees that the Chair write to the Minister of Emergency Management and Recovery requesting they raise the implications of the proposed rates targeted model for sustainable CDM funding with the relevant ministers and explore options for exempting CDM funding from the proposed rates target model. I just want to note over the weekend an email came through from Taitura which advises rates capping legislation will be out June or July this year, but it will not be enacted before the election. Nothing further.
Great. There been none. I just had one in regards to the letter. Are there any other seeding groups who have approached the minister directly? Would there be any benefit from a collective approach? The letter? Julian.
I'm unaware, Chair, of any other groups that are writing a letter. I can certainly reach out to my colleagues in the 16 civil defence groups and see if anything's been done, and if not, if there's benefits. There would be, of course, the louder the voice, the stronger the message. So if I could, I'll take that away and speak to the other managers and see if anyone's has or is proposing to do so.
Staff action. Yeah, any further questions? Yeah, just quickly, I want to thank Vicky and staff and all the committee members who joined in to review the submissions. I know a lot of work went in on it, and it came at a difficult time and was a substantial in size. So thanks to everyone who worked. It's really appreciated by the team and myself. Hopefully we see some constructive changes come through in the bill. And certainly I think a letter to the minister is appropriate given the implications it will have for civil defence. So we just need a, oh, sorry, Councillor Eugene.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I just, I think this letter to the minister was something that Mayor Axel might have discussed at the previous meeting. So I just want to say that we support a letter going to the minister. Committee's supportive of that. As Julian mentioned, we get heard, the better. It is an issue if it is going to be coming to that capping and what's the effects it's going to have, So these events get more and more regular, we out there.
100%.
And also, well done on all of the submissions. Busy time for everybody with these and the submissions coming to us all the time.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further comments or debate? There being none, can I have a mover for the staff recommendation? Councillor Marker. And a seconder. Deputy Mayor Grant. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Okay, move now to item 6.2 on page 98. The regional consistent long-term plan measures, and I'll invite Aaron to present. Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6.2, regionally consistent long-term plan measures. I'll take the report as read. The purpose, we're seeking joint committee approval of regionally consistent set of CDM KPIs for inclusion in council long-term plans. The following measures were developed in conjunction with Matamata Piako District Council's Democracy Services team and have been endorsed by KEG. The measures are readiness, 25% averaged over 12 months of full-time permanent council staff are trained to ITF intermediate course level. Data for this measure will be based on individual council HR and training records. Statutory CDM roles, controller and recovery manager and local welfare manager positions are filled or accessible based on the associated policy or by MOU or agreement, or have an appointment process in place. Data for this measure will be based on individual council HR and training records. Please note that the measure about statutory roles does not apply to Waikato Regional Council, as they do not hold these positions in their organisation. Under response and recovery, one independently assessed full or functional exercise is conducted annually to identify strengths and opportunities in processes and procedures, which must include recovery. There is an exemption for that measure where an EOC activation that triggers an after action report in alignment with the CDM group policy is to occur. If that happens, then they do not need to hold an exercise. Adoption of consistent, robust and auditable performance measures across Waikato councils represents a significant step forward in improving emergency management capability and accountability. Staff recommendation is one, that the report regionally consistent long-term plan measures is received, and that the Waikato CDM Group Joint Committee approves a regionally consistent long-term plan key performance indicators for civil defence emergency management across Waikato councils, and requests that all Waikato councils include these measures in their draft long-term plans for 2027-2037. Thank you.
Yeah, Aaron. Open the floor for questions. Me, Grant.
Thank you very much, and I welcome first of all concepts such as this to be put in place across this. But in reading it, I had to start wondering and raise the question with our own team as to where exactly we sit at the moment, and wasn't able to get an answer apart from above 25%. So the first question is, have you canvassed the councils around the region to see what impact this will have on their current operational activities in regard to getting up to that 25% level? And can you just throw a little light as to how you reach 25%? What's a magical number of some sort? Or?
So we have discussed this at length with the seating professionals, and we've looked at how we can support councils as a group, and have a number of people available for when councils are in activation, how they're able, a number that would be sufficient to provide support to those councils. We came to 25% because we looked at a percentage because yes, we've got some very large councils, some very small councils, and it was scalable based on the amount of people that they had. So the seating professionals believe that they are not far away from that 25%, and it is a measure that we've had that we've been reporting to for a few years now.
Supplementary, if I'm. Are there other measures that are in place at the moment? Because I understand that there are things like the need to hold regularly a EOC exercise. So would this be complementary to other measures as well?
Yes. So got the one response and recovery measure in here, so that's already in place, and there is the need to hold an exercise annually. We have adjusted that measure slightly so that it becomes more of a focused activation rather than using the current scoring guide. But yeah, they would be complementary to the current measure.
Thank you, Deputy Grant. Any further questions?
Can I just explain? Aaron's made a comment about the second KPI not being relevant to the regional council. I think just in case anybody's wondering why, so the regional council, so in terms of the statutory roles, if the regional council held a local statutory role of recovery manager or controller, because of the regional footprint, if you want, or mandate that the regional council has, it would mean that they were operating somebody in a statutory position in conflict with somebody at a local level who was also in a statutory position, because you operate in the same geographical space. So we remove that by saying that the regional council doesn't have, we wouldn't appoint a statutory role holder into the regional council, such as a recovery manager or controller, but they still have to have all the other functions in terms of the SIMs and the exercise. It just avoids that command and control clash at a local level.
Thanks for that clarification. I just had one question, or sorry, two questions. When will we be able to review and potentially add to these KPIs? And how or will these KPI results come back to Joint Committee for?
I can answer that, Chair. So if approved, then it is recommended that each member take these KPIs back to the council. The Joint Committee cannot impose, although the decisions of this committee are supposed to be binding on councils. We recognise that there will be cost implications. This in terms of training and budgetary back. So legally, we cannot impose this KPI on all the members around the table, but you are recommended to take it back. That would be, so every council then has to report publicly on that KPI, and that would get aggregated up and reported to the joint committee as it is to KEG in terms of that consistent approach. We'd probably look at it more from the public would be more interested in a local council in terms of how it's meeting their obligations. We would look at it from a collective point of view to make sure that we've got capacity and the support across the areas. As Aaron talked about earlier, the percentage is actually based on a number. We worked out that we need X many hundred of people to operate surge capacity and a regional entity and a local event. So that's where the 25% comes in. It's based on the hundreds of people that we would need to operate an emergency. It would only get reviewed at the end of this LTP. So if it's approved, they get put in the next time to review this, the next round of LTP, because they become publicly.
Thank you. No further questions. I can open up for debate. I think this is a sensible step forward and it aligns well with our regional plan, as well as the intent for the new emergency management bill. We need to ensure that all councils have measured KPIs to track our process and support our civil defence capabilities. So I think this is a good step forward and makes good progress. So can I ask for a mover? Staff recommendation. Councillor Maguire and a seconder from Councillor Marcus. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. We will move to 6.3, the KEG report. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. It was a long meeting, but the highlight was purpose piece of work was the Mehiko Waikato to welcome iwi representatives from Raukawa and Maniapoto. It was unfortunately it clashed with other activities, so there was a turnout. Nonetheless, it's an important step in a group action that has been last 3 years at least. So a real milestone was passed. When we are in a position to welcome and introduce other iwi representatives, there were things that we learned from the Whakatau. Was it Friday the 13th? I knew there was something significant about the date. Other than that, as I said, it was a long agenda. A number of actions and reports are actually here, having been recommended from the executive group. The most important highlight, firstly, we've agreed to look at how we charge and review our administrative costs. It is another sort of ongoing saga, at least for the term that I've been the chair of KEG, on how administrative costs are allocated from regional council to the group. And so it'd be useful to get that piece of work done and see if we can reach agreement with the regional council, as well as have some certainty going forward as to how those administrative costs be shared. The other matter was around the land instability and the landslide risks. I think it was fairly topical at the time, certainly taking into account what happened in Tauranga, as well as the heavy rainfall that we've been having constantly, it seems. But the process has been agreed, working with local councils and identification of potential risks and as a first step. Other than that, I think it's self-explanatory, least of which some of the items are here decision, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Susan. Deputy Mayor Grant.
Thank you, Susan, for the update. A couple of questions. First of all, in regard to land stability, having just gone through yet another event with quite a considerable amount of rainfall, has raised questions again about land instability, our neck of the woods, and whilst it is an absolute concern for us, so is the cost of being able to do the wildland stability reporting. Was that considered and discussed, and whose responsibility is it to actually meet the costs of doing that? And I look at a place like Coromandel, it's a very expensive exercise from our perspective.
Yes, Councillor, it was discussed. It is of concern to each and every council, the cost and the resources required to undertake that piece of work. At this stage, we've had no indication that we would get funding to undertake it. So the first step is actually identifying what can be done within the existing resource. But I think Juliet's going to add.
I think just for clarity, Councillor, thank you, Chair. For clarity, the work that we've agreed at KEG does not take away any of the existing or supersede any of the existing legislation that says, actually, no surprises here, that the local authorities are responsible for the management of land instability and landslip risk, where obviously where it's in your jurisdiction. What we've recognised at KEG is exactly the point that you've made, is the inconsistency of how that's approached, not least because there isn't a consistent national framework on how that land instability assessment is done. But what NEMA have done at the same time is written a letter to the Joint Committee and the Chair, reminding us as a civil defence group that the legislation puts some responsibility, it's an overlap in responsibility between local authorities and the CDEM group to identify, assess and mitigate risks, and land instability is one of those risks for us. So this is one of those areas that crosses over in terms of responsibility. So noting your comment about the costs, what we're doing in the first instance is understanding what work we already have, what risk we know already exists from previous assessments, because there would have been a lot of assessments done in terms of consenting over the years or responding to previous events where there's been a slip and geotech services have gone out and had a look. So there's a lot of information out there that's not known, that's held by the local authorities, that's not known at the centre. So we're going to bring that in and then identify where some of our gaps are. So understand what we know, what risk that tells us we know about, and importantly, what gaps we don't know anything about, but there's that known unknown in terms of risk. We will do that work from the centre using a budget that I don't have, to be honest, is in terms of resourcing, some contracted services budget that we will reprofile for this piece of work. The biggest cost, however, is yet to be determined, and where that money comes from is yet to be discussed. But it's the mitigation, it's the consistent mitigation and the consistent assessment of the or getting a good understanding of the unknown risk. Where does that money come from? And there are some levers in the current Act, which don't look like they're going to change in the new bill, that allows the group to undertake cost-effective risk reduction measures. But what that means is that you're asking the CDEM group to rate every ratepayer in the region, or that's if we get to this point, we rate for that particular piece of work. We don't ask the council to do it. By doing that, we ask the CDEM group to do it through the regional council, and then we do the work in a consistent way. And that way we avoid, or we hope to avoid, postcode lottery where a council has to make difficult decisions to say, well, I haven't got the money to undertake that landslip assessment. Another council say, well, I have got the money to do that landslip assessment. By bringing it under your auspice as a civil defence group, get a consistent, or proposing to get a consistent approach. But these are discussions and decisions that are going to be made in the future. Right now, it's that gap analysis using existing budget.
Mirish.
Yeah, just a question on that, is, you know, when you reflect on it, you know, like John was saying, and even in our area, we did some assessing around, you know, around our water treatment plants up against the mountain, and also swim zones and the domain, places like that. But it would almost change too, you know, that's the problem. You could have geotech come out 1 month and have a look after a storm and the area, but then you get another one only weeks later. Then surely it changes the game again, you know, like potentially, you know, how large is that, you know, when you reflect on, especially up the Coromandel, I go up there all the time, you know, and you get slips, you know, but it's a changing platform. That's the problem, you know, like how often would you do them, you know, like that's a question I have. It's to be open up a can of worms of how effective it actually would be, you know, like I don't know the answer to it.
I think through yourself, Chair. There's two parts of it. You look at our group plan and you look at the risk assessment we have, and this is where things don't neatly fit into my little pigeonhole box. Is you've got land instability as its own risk. Then you've got severe weather and as a separate risk. But within this severe weather impacts, land instability comes, and that's your rain. I think what we're focusing on at the moment, or what I believe we're focusing on at the moment, is forget the severe weather thing, put that to one side. We're focusing on the land instability risk, in terms of the topography, the soil, all of those components. Those things won't change, and they are the starting point whether there's a risk in this weather. So that's the bit that and you're absolutely right, depending on where the rain falls, will change the risk profile. But at the moment, we're just purely looking, or proposing to purely look at the land stability risk, which is about the topography and the soil, and is it susceptible to rain-induced slip? That's and once we've got that in place, I know that GNS Science, or they call Earth Sciences New Zealand at the moment, have, although the feedback I'm getting is it's too broad scale, it's not detailed enough at the moment to give an accurate localized risk assessment. But the work is really developing that space. Once we've got that landslip assessment done generically, then we've got the rain forecast coming in, and we run that model once it's better defined, or better refined, over our landslip assessment. Should start to identify where there's likely to be a risk from the rainfall. But I think it also will pick up for us, and it will also pick up for us, no surprises, that the geography, topography, soil type, etc., over in Thames Coromandel or on the Kaimai will tell you that anything that's on the bottom of the hill, like the domain or the water treatment plant or the town of Tiaraha, is at risk from landslip. So I think there's some really obvious things it's going to tell us that you're going to ask the question, we'll know that anyway. I think we've got to start somewhere.
And I agree. And would it be prioritised around risk of human life and infrastructure like water treatment, wastewater treatment?
I can just add to that as well. It's probably not a question, unfortunately. It's just more of a statement of overall concern. You know, these things are really, really important issues, and honestly, you know, there's a life risk involved in a number of these issues, and you feel that responsibility. But whenever an event, and I think you just summarised it quite well, you can model it to say, yes, we've got known areas of vulnerability, and yes, that brain could impact those. But that immediately infers a need to then follow that up with a review post-event to understand if there has been movement or if there has been any further issues. Again, that's another cost, and who bears that cost? And particularly in an area like Thames Coromandel, it's on a small ratepayer base with now proposed capping on rates. Something has to give to be able to provide and do those additional services. So I really welcome the opportunity. It's great to have that fully supported, but I think we should be doing this with absolute clarity as to what the definition of expectation is and whose role and responsibility is this to do this, which then identifies what costs are involved and who has to bear those costs and how they can be funded and paid for.
And in just to support your conversation, in response, the chair wrote a letter back to the director of emergency management when the letter came out, pointing out to us as civil defence groups that we have that overlap in responsibility to identify, assess and mitigate those landslip risks. And in the letter the chair wrote back, there was also a very clear message that there is a national central government role here in terms of leadership, and we would be really happy to participate as a group to try and get that consistent approach and guidance of how things are going to be done at a national level. Part of that conversation would be, of course, where does the money come from? But there's also an opportunity at a regional level when you look at some of the local government reform stuff that's being put out at the moment. It doesn't take us away from where we are now. The current responsibility sits with the local authority. There's an overlapping responsibility for the CDEM groups, but we've talked about that. The opportunity under the local government reform, when we're talking about combined territories boards and particularly the regional reorganisation plan that comes out of that, there's a real opportunity to turn around and have a conversation with central government in legislative terms, who's the best organisation to own this risk? And is this something that is taken up to the Ministry for the Environment? Is this responsibility for landslip better sitting with the regional council, or does it stay with the local authority with greater investment? But there's some real opportunities at the moment. I know that the legislative reform creates a lot of work, but there's also creates some opportunities to have the conversation around roles and responsibilities for what is a very issue.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, just a reminder, if anyone wants to speak, then use the right hand button on your microphone. Yeah, perfect. Councillor Gower.
Julian, just wondering if this modelling had already been done, how would it have helped us? Assets risk.
That's a really good question, because the slip that you had, or the event that you had in Otorohanga and Waikato, were off the scale in terms of, I think it was 1 in 200 event. So I would suggest that if this happened in 10 years in the future, you've identified, assessed, and importantly mitigated the risk. Going back to Councillor Grant or Deputy Mayor Grant's comments, there will be a limitation on that mitigation. You will mitigate it against what? 1 in 100 year, 1 in 200 year. You really mitigate it up to. So the reality is, I don't know if it some parameters around mitigation that you would put in place, recognizing that the risk against the water treatment plant was X. Therefore, the best way to mitigate that is this engineering that there to take this or divert the slip away from the treatment. but it's only for a 1 in 100 year event. That's where a lot of the stop banks and the other flood protection infrastructure is around the region. It's at that kind of 1 in 100 year. Would you really have engineered it? Suspect not, because of the trade-off being took.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. If you meet Edie.
Kia ora. Morning, everyone. What are the names of the iwi representatives? The committee, and reading the formally introduced, what formal role will our people have?
It's a bit of role. The names of the representatives, Tangawa. He was represented by me, and from Waikato, get out of my Anaru's from Rokawa. Sorry, we'll come back to you.
Oh, yes. What is there a more? Will they be more tikanga supportive, or will there be as much involvement in planning and preparation as opposed to just response?
We full members of KEG participate, so that everything that we do in terms of planning, touring, decision making, they'll be part.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Edie. Councillor Maguire.
Question for, is there a budget estimate of that assessment? Like, we've got an idea what we're actually out here. Is it millions? Is it major? That sets the tone of where we'd be best to put your emphasis on, whether you're going back to MFE or government, or whether it's nationwide, whether it's ongoing, whether it's a one-off assessment, and whether that would take into account things just like if it was a roving ongoing thing, which would take account of maintenance of certain areas, a tree that's likely to wash in the next 250-year event or the 100-year event or whatever.
It is the $64 million question, pardon the pun. We do not know until we've undertaken the current gap analysis and then tried to understand with some subject matter experts what the best approach would be, whether it is a one-off or and then it's the weather and the cyclic reviews. We do not have a figure, but I think the fact that councils, you've heard the tenor of, and it's not the first time I've heard the tenor of the conversation, is this is big bucks and councils don't have a budget for this, and councils, there is a tension between capping rates and doing this work, recognising the risk. All of those conversations would lend me to tell you that we're talking big dollar. If for a region of our size, 10 councils and a regional councils, I would suggest we are talking the up end of figures that you're talking, hundreds of thousands. But that is just figure, that's in the air thing. It really is. Until we do that gap analysis, can't. That's for mitigation work. That's the assessment and cost-effective mitigation, but that's across 10 councils or 11.
Being there that you're looking at preemptive, pre-emergency, head it off before it happens.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. Susan has a response to your question, Deputy Mayor Edie.
Apologies. Raukawa's delegated to Anpi, Maniapoto, Ashina, Tainui, who were unavailable.
Susan. Councillor Stephen.
Morena, everyone. Just picking up off Julian's corridor there. And I think back to the gap analysis, there's probably a lot of material out there already between earth sciences and surveyors and what have you. So I guess just a comment that would be probably a good place to start, so we're not going out there and reinventing the wheel. And I certainly like the approach, just focusing on the land instability risk as a starter once again. Was could very quickly get into that space of how long is a piece of string thing. Just a couple of comments really. And then just picking up on Edie's comment, the representatives. I know I mentioned it and asked about two whare toa and where did we get to with that?
Is
So that has, so Ngāti Tū Wharetoa conversations are active, they're ongoing, and my understanding is that they're very close to being able to have the capacity, it's a capacity issue, to be on the executive. So I think it'll certainly, my understanding is it'll certainly be in this calendar year.
Perhaps we could comment for awareness of other new members here on other iwi and their readiness and opportunities to join KEG also.
So at the moment, the team have been working with the iwi that are engaged, if you want, or have processes and structures that have been able to engage regional council, and it's work on the basis that if they can engage with the regional council, then they're able to the benchmark that they're able to engage with us as a system. They have the capacity to do that. Of course, there are some challenges around that, particularly for Hauraki for us, in terms of Hauraki have iwi or a collective Hauraki Maori Trust Board who are representing the interests in the treaty negotiations, not necessarily in other areas of business such as emergency management. So, and it would probably, and at the moment, the regional council, I understand it, they engage with Hauraki Maori Trust Board in a lot of occasions for things to do with issues to do with mana whenua for Hauraki. For us as a civil defence group, the message that we're getting is not necessarily Hauraki Maori Trust Board, and it might be individual iwi, a combination or a collective of the Hauraki Maori Trust Board. But that's down the line for us as well. Those treaty negotiations and that work's being done regionally there.
Thank you. So from our side, we're open for.
Oh, absolutely. We are absolutely open. Yeah. The approach that we've taken, the approach that we've taken in the past, as the KEG chair pointed out, we've been working on this for a number of years. It's been over 3 years, trying to get better representation. Our representation of iwi and Maori, representing Maori in the emergency management system. We started going down the line, and you as a joint committee or your predecessor agreed with iwi membership or iwi leaders being on joint committee. That was the advice that we got at one point in the journey. That changed over time, where it was better to have that relationship at a local level. and that local and the rubber hits the road and the variety committees and the Manawhenua sit, and therefore but leave the door open if you sit on joint committee, that resolution still sits there is at any point. So the approach that we've taken based on some feedback, particularly from Waikato Tainui at the time, it's better from the ground up. So that work can be then overseen. So when I go back to Hauraki Maori Trust Board not Hauraki, I go back to the iwi who have just come onto KEG. Each one of those iwi has a local civil defence emergency management work program with the relevant local. So whether it's Hamilton City Council, whether it's District Council, Waipara District Council, there is a local emergency management work program that exists between the local authority and so once you've got that benchmark, if you want, all that foundation in place, it then makes sense that at an executive group level, that work is overseen and supported and coordinated at the at that executive level and reported up. So until we can get a situation, that would be really the pathway in. Until there is a local work program between local authority, the local emergency management, then once we've got that, then it's appropriate that we've got people sat on KEG overseeing that. Where there's no local work program, there's a bit of a disconnect with the local authority. There's a bit of a disconnect if you bring the iwi straight into a regional entity overseeing civil defence, but there's no connection at that local level with the local. So that's probably a practical gateway in.
Councillor Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just sort of thinking if this proposed cost for this gap analysis is going to be in the hundreds of thousands or even the low millions, possibly, who knows, that we could use this as an example for the letter back to NEMA and central government, which we passed the early resolution for as well, and just feed that back to them, because it's going to have an impact on both this regional and our local councils as well.
Sorry, just for clarity, the gap analysis is not going to cost us that much. The mitigation, the cost-effective mitigation in terms of whatever that engineering response looks like, etc. That's where I think we're talking about and any process around the recurring reviews. That's where it's going to cost the big bucks. I think that's. But I hear what you're saying, and I know in a meeting I had with the chair, she mentioned something similar.
Great mind. Any further questions? I know we've had a good round questioning so far. I just had one left. In the letter that was circulated to all members from NEMA, there were some tools and resources offered to us. Can you clarify whether these are ordinarily available? And supplementary question, can we ever give complete assurance that the letter was asking for?
So the tools I think you're talking about, Chair, are the Earth Sciences tool. So the feedback, let's deal with that one. The feedback I've had is it's a good tool. It does forecasting and hindcasting. This is the old GNS. So in terms of the hindcasting, what's just fallen, what risk does that create? Forecasting, obviously, we know what's coming down the line, and is this likely to create as an issue? So the tool is now available to us. The feedback I've had from the subject matter experts here at the Regional Council is the effectiveness of that tool at the moment isn't as good as you'd want it to be, because it doesn't, in Thames Coromandel, for example, bit of a microclimate, you get very heavy rain, 305 millimeters, I think, up at Golden Cross over the weekend, but 180 millimeters just down the road at somewhere else. So it really does vary where that. But the modelling, as I understand it, it's been explained to me. Modelling from GNS Science is not that precise. It's actually broader down. So it would suggest to us, it wouldn't provide us with a precise risk. So, but it's still better than before, which was nothing. Your other question was is the risk?
Yeah, basically around getting complete assurance that the letter was that.
So the letter was very much pointing out was for me, it was very much telling us that the responsibility sat with us and as a group, and putting pressure on us to make sure that we were having a look at this known risk and dealing with it. And the letter that we wrote back identified that actually we know that land instability is a risk. We know that there are overlapping responsibilities. Actually, part of our feedback going back some time in terms of current legislation was the difficulties of having such overlaps, because in legislation where the local authorities have the same the same responsibilities as the civil defence group when it comes to reduction activities. So, or some of the reduction activities. So part of the feedback was it would be really good to clean this up where we know what the joint committee is responsible for, local authorities are responsible. So you can do your oversight role. But the letter from NEMA very much uses that grey and puts us in the position that can't unknow this. NEMA have said to us, you can't unknow this. We're reminding you that this is your own. We've gone back and said, for all the reasons that we've discussed here, we acknowledge that, and that's why we are recommending a collective approach in terms of the gap analysis. But we've also pointed out that there is a role for central government here. We haven't landed. This risk hasn't just landed overnight. This risk has emerged from people traversing resource management legislation over the years, and over the generations that has seen houses and infrastructure built at the bottom of hills, on the side of hills, on the top of. So this isn't anything that we've created. It is something that that's what our letter is saying, that we have inherited. And even if the legislation was to change tomorrow and say no more development on the side, on the top, or on the bottom of hills, we've still got the legacy that is probably all of the town of Tiaraha, the whole Thames Coromandel, and places around Waitomo and Taupo. So we've got this risk, and we cannot, in terms of give the clarity or give the confidence back to NEMA that we are all over this risk. We cannot, because we have in our group plan a risk. So the risk assessment shows that land instability is an individual item, not the severe weather, and the severe weather. But we know that that's a risk for us. What we don't know is where that risk is, how big that risk is, and what work's being done by the individual members to date. So we're in a fact-finding phase. What we can't give is any assurance that we're all over the extent of this risk and able to mitigate it. Just too complex. And central government, your letter back, Chair said, central government has a role. We welcome working with central government to clarify these roles and responsibilities. Some of that fund.
Thank you. Questions are exhausted, so any debate? And just quickly, I did want to endorse Susan's comments on the significant milestone at the meeting to have representatives from Raukawa and Te Nihinui to KEG. This work was endorsed, as Susan had mentioned, over the last 3 years by the previous joint committee, and as Deputy Mayor Edie said, it helps ensure we're engaging with Māori at all levels and not just during response, which is key, and will benefit the wider community. So it's a really great positive step forward, and I look forward to seeing other members join us and other iwi join us in time. So can we have a mover for the staff recommendation? Mayor Ash, and a seconder. Councillor Michael. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. moving along to Group Action Plan 6.4 on page 106. And I'll invite Vicky to present. And Irving. And Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just Aaron and Irving is if there's any questions on the detail in the attachment, they handle the operational side, so I don't sit here and go at you. So, okay, so this is the first reporting round since your joint committee adopted the group plan actions 25-2030 in October. Or effective from October, I should say. The group plan actions set out what the group needs to do to deliver the outcomes identified in the strategic group plan 2025-2030. So as this is the first reporting, I thought I'd go into a little bit more detail. So hopefully from future meetings, we're a little bit more streamlined. So the group plan actions, what you'll find attached is the regional work program for the year one of that. So those are all the things in the group plan actions that we said we're going to work through in this first year. It's broken down into work streams on the left-hand column, and I was just going to do a brief overview of each. I might stop at the end of each if you've got any questions for Aaron and Irving. So the governance and management work stream, the first part of that is partnering with Māori, and that is on track. We've heard obviously about Raukawa and Maniapoto joining KEG, increasing number of co-created work plans, and strengthen alignment with expectations of the strategic group plan objectives. Then the next part of that work stream is the long-term plan measures, which is on track. You've had the report brought to this meeting today about the KPIs. Delivery of CDM across the group at risk. This is a timeline issue due to legislation coming in later than we've expected, and we've put a timeline in there that we can't meet. That will be reviewed so that in year two it won't reflect that. The monitoring and assurance framework is on track. So through group plan actions reporting, there's the development of a local implementation plan, which was approved by KEG at their last meeting, and that's for an 18-month timeframe. So those local deliveries aligned with your long-term plan cycles for budgeting purposes. And there was a note that some future resourcing depends on LTP 2737 decisions. I just want to note the monitoring and assurance is the Joint Committee's primary assurance mechanism and underpins all future committee reporting. So that's it for that work stream. I don't know if anyone's got any queries on any lines of the attachments, or I'll move on. Okay, so the next stream is the risk reduction work stream, which Irving's team handles. So the regional hazard and risk analysis is on track. Hickory subduction zone impact shared with partners, the Kirapehi fault exposure analysts, scoping underway. Infrastructure resilience is on track with the Waikato Lifeline Utilities Group project progressing, interdependency mapping underway, and contractor engagement completed. Some emerging dependencies are subject matter expert availability, but that's manageable with no intervention required currently. So, okay. The community empowerment work stream. This covers marae preparedness work that's on track. The completed is the marae hazard scoping, the marae preparedness framework provided to councils, and local engagement underway. Some councils report limited staff time to progress marae planning at the desired pace. So that's just a limitation currently that's been identified. Community-led response planning is on track, templates and support ready, workshops for at-risk communities to begin this year, and then Māori partnership in the community empowerment work stream, enhanced communication pathways with iwi and marae, welfare cost recovery and analysis, paused, awaiting legislative direction. So that covers. No questions? Okay. Operational readiness and response work stream. These projects could collectively uplift the system capability. All major projects are on track, including the common operating picture, being GIS, operational response plans, New Zealand response team business case, operational management tool business case, and AI decisions tool investigation. Okay, recovery work stream. Building recovery capability is on track. Irvin will tell me what RRANZ stands for.
That is the range course that they do, Messi.
Yeah, response recovery in New Zealand, whatever. Quarterly recovery manager training continues. Operational resources and toolkits are on track with resource gaps identified, informing national consistency work. Strategic planning for recovery is on track. All councils progressing their local strategic recovery plans. And there's some dependency in there awaiting NEMA's national training framework.
Thank you.
And that. Okay, so overall, delivery is on track on all work streams. No governance interventions required at this stage. Several emerging risks will require funding decisions and ongoing strategic oversight. But this is the reporting baseline that's now been established, and the committee will receive those constant risk-focused quarterly reporting moving forward. So on the attachment, you'll notice the blue component of it is from your group plan actions document that you adopted. The green component is the reporting framework that's been agreed at the last KEG meeting, and that's how it will come through line by line with regard to local implementation plan and local authority progress working on iwi workstream programs. They will come in as summarised content and future reporting. They're obviously not here at this meeting because they were only adopted at the recent KEG meeting. And in this, there's no trend in this current reporting because obviously we're at the first reporting quarter, so trends will begin from there on. So you have a fast visual track. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Don't even need our expert. Oh, sorry. I take it back. Deputy Mayor Grant.
Thank you. Thank you for the detail in this. A couple of questions, and I've saved them to the end to probably help you flow a little bit. But on page 110, the infrastructure resilience, it talks about the need for understanding of infrastructure interdependencies. I'm just wondering, where does places like Coromandel fit in regard to dependencies, in regard to our roading infrastructure? If you could just, is that in scope of this? And if so, what are the implications of that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that is definitely in scope. We look at critical infrastructure and categorize them 1, 2, and 3. Depends on if it's regional, national, or local significant infrastructure, and we incorporate that into the planning and to make sure that the interdependencies of, example, a road, access to a critical site, a water treatment plant, or something else that is incorporated.
And the second question I had was on page 112, which is the decision support tool, AI. Good to see something like this in there, and I'm just wondering whether that will be a tool that will be able to be accessed at a local council level as well.
So thank you. So there is so we've got subject matter experts working in the office, some of our volunteers looking into AI and how it can be used. Some of our reports recently haven't been that favourable. It seems that it works really well in a big city. It doesn't work that well in a large dispersed area like the Waikato, but we are looking into how it can be. We envisage it being able to be used once we how it's best used.
Question just sort of what was mentioned there, the Kiripei fine for the newbie. Could you bring the newbies up to speed on what is involved with that? Is it something like the fault line that runs through Christchurch, or?
We've been working on the Karakia subduction zone for about 2 years now, and the Karakia fault has been identified as a fault that we need to look at as well. That's within our region. At this stage, we're just doing is scoping around it and just understanding what the implications of that might be, working with the science sector in that space as well. So still early days, and the intention of this year is to just look at scoping of that.
How long has this fault been on? Is it through the testing and trialing or surveys or?
So through,
Yeah, got that.
decades. Yeah. So there is, sorry, it's been known for some time. It actually runs, as Mayor Ash wants to talk about it, because it runs right under some of the big industry over there in terms of the chicken factory and Ingham's. Yeah. So it's a well-known, and this is where I have to kind of manage a little bit of expectation. I think the plan is to do this work. We postponed the Karakia fault line work to manage some budgets. So we were obviously needed to make some decisions to curtail our budget this year because we started the year overspent. And one of the things that was supposed to be done this year was to understand more about the consequences. So we know where the fault line is, but doing some modelling, knowing how the area's developed since the fault line's been there, how the area's developed and what the consequences would be, a realistic rupture of that. But because, so we have prioritised up until now the Karakia subduction zone, because that's new science that we haven't known a huge amount about, and it's probably one of the biggest risk in terms of scale and proximity in time of when it's likely to happen. So we've invested our money into that research and that modelling. Intent was to do some more modelling on consequences of Karakia this year, but we pushed that out to next year because it was we had to make some budgetary decisions. Of course, the new risk that we've always known about Karakia. We've got to ask ourselves. I've got to ask in the office ourselves: do we need to review or do any more work at this moment in time in terms of Karakia? We've got quite a bit of science around that, and we know what shaking looks like. Karakia and shaking is shaking, we could argue. But when I've got the landslip assessment, so I've got some money set aside to do some of this science work, it's not a huge budget, where am I going to put it? So it may well be, just to manage expectations, it may well be that I go to KEG, talk about we're going to further park the Karakia modelling and use that money for the landslip modelling. We've already got some shaking data from Karakia. It could be argued quite rightly that the landslip consequences, the shaking of Karakia, are more important than understanding in its own. So there's some decisions got to be made around.
So it's a nice to know rather.
I think it is a have to know. It definitely is a have to know. It's just and if you gave me a budget, I'd do it all concurrent. I would do it all concurrently. Reality is I have to make some recommendations around where I prioritize it. I think there are that's a known, and it's just what's it going to do? What else can we know about it? We've got some known unknown problem, that land instability in the Karakia.
Councillor Andrew.
Yeah, Julian, University of Waikato geotech students did a bit of a dig on the Karakia fault 2-3 years ago out of Tautanui, didn't they, Ash? So there might be some information there ready for you to pick up on the cheap, hopefully.
Thank you. All our questions. So I'll move the staff recommendation to receive the report for 1st of October to 31st of January 2026. Can I have a seconder? Mayor Ash. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. I'll just check members, do we need a 5-minute comfort stop or are we happy to keep going? I think it's due at 12, so we're happy to keep going. Oh, perfect. Okay, we'll move to item 6.5, the group finances, and I'll hand it over to Julian to present.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is a standing report to outline the group's financial performance for Q2 of the financial year 25-26. The report highlights 2 new emerging financial risks and pressures for this year, included unbudgeted operational demands arising from recent events, and some of the hazard and risk research requirements that have just been well traversed under the last plan action in terms of that landslip stuff. So there are proposed initiatives and associated costs that will require you as a committee, your consideration for targeted rate increase through the WRC's long-term plan in 27-37. But the headline here is the current Q2 reporting is forecasting giving us a current net deficit of $153,000 with expenditure exceeding income. I would ask you to just put that to one side, and I'll explain why. And that is because we started the year with a deficit of $169,000, and we said that we were going to manage that $169,000 or try to manage it and mitigate it within existing decisions, hence why the Karakia fault line was pushed to one side or pushed out a year, etc. So the other thing that impacted our budgets that has been previously reported is we were given a charge, an allocated cost charge by the administrating authority that was outside of our control, that was not expected. So when you look at the $153,000 deficit in that context of a start the year already in deficit, plus we've been given some costs that we weren't expected in terms of allocated costs, we should have been significantly more than $53,000 in deficit at this point. There is some good news, however, in relation to that $169,000 deficit and the allocated costs that were given to us out of our control, is that the regional council have advised us that subject to operating expenditure surplus, they intend to offset all of those, all of that overspend at the end of the financial year. So that's a really good, and that puts the 150. That's why I'm saying park $153,000, subject to the operational operating expenditure having a surplus in it. The regional council voted at the last meeting to use the words wipe or get rid of that deficit that we were expected to have in our reserves. That doesn't mean that we will be, however, out of the woods, because I've already talked about the operational costs for the responses in January and February, and some of the stuff that happened last week in terms of having to stand up responses and spend some operational costs that we don't have a response budget. Vicky has kindly estimated that the average cost of one of these responses when we've had them is around $150,000. But at this moment in time, per response, at this time, I don't have a figure for you. What I know is, even if regional council are able to use their operational surplus to wipe out the deficits, that those deficits are related to local service level agreements. They're not regional. They're not, on the whole, they're not relevant to regional services. They were those local service agreements. Even if the regional council is able to clear off that, we are got some financial pressures coming on us from the unbudgeted responses. So till such time as we know that we've got all those invoices in and we can quantify it, which will be in the next quarter, then I can't give you a figure on that. All I can do is assure you that we are making budgetary decisions. We're very tight on our budget, making sure that we're only spending what we need. And then at the end of the year, I'm probably going to have to come to you and talk about whatever our budget looks like. And that might be that, irrespective of the type financial or fiscal constraint. The other thing to talk about is the annual, so other costs, sorry, this year we're a legacy of a previous response. We have overspent in and had to reprofile some monies in terms of coronial legal expenses. Again, that's part of our, it was the same last year, and some of that carried over into this year. So we did have to reprofile some of that money. So going forward, so that's where we are currently. Going forward, the regional council has just adopted its draft annual plan 26-27, and that does include a increase to the CDEM targeted rate. That totals $237,000. That increase reflects a pass-through of the operational costs and needed to maintain the existing level of service that you or your predecessors at the previous LTP. So there's no increased level of service, there's no new work programs. The cost that has been put into the annual plan for CDEM is there to make sure that we tread water and maintain the level of service that you've previously agreed. So on that basis, we're not asking you to make a decision on the regional council annual plan because you've previously made a decision for level of service in the long-term plan. This is just making sure that the regional council are rating based on your previous directions, if that.
I just asked a question on it, Julian. So that's a $230,000 increase targeted rate
For regional civil defence as of 26-27. Yes. A dollar of property, roughly.
And when a district goes into a state of emergency, is there any funding that's triggered from government that can go to?
So yes, in certain circumstances. So the operational costs, no. So when we are the costs, for example, of standing up our emergency coordination centre here, or you standing up your emergency operations centre, that local level, those costs on the whole are costs that are borne by the civil defence group or the council itself. Where those costs are delivering a welfare service, in essence, in the response phase where we are using some kind of logistics company, whether it's trucks, trailers, boats, helicopters, to get a welfare service or underdo welfare assessments for our community, then we can claim, we have to spend it, but we can try and claim that money back from. And as long as they are within the framework of what they call Section 33 costs of what is described as a basic welfare assessment, it's not making things it's not making things better, it's just making sure people are safe and comfortable, then you should be able to get 100% of those costs back. Then you move into recovery, and there are some opportunities for those councils who are in recovery to claim money, central government. They call the horizontal infrastructure, so any pipes, roads, etc. And there's a ratio of 60-40. There's a far more, they say 60-40, a far more complex calculator in the background that determines what the end result is, and it's to do with capital values. So yes, there is money that's available for that damage, YPAR and the infrastructure damage in terms of the pipes and the road.
Has there been any thought around regional council maybe potentially rating for, say, a contingency fund. So instead of, say, 237, another, 50 cents per year is another 100,000. Because we often get to these emergencies, there's no money, there's no funding, and that's where everyone's struggling. So is that something that could be talked about?
Yeah, so very, very timely question. So one of the discussions at KEG, one of the considerations being looked at in the LTP business cases that have been put forward at the moment is a contingency plan for response. This has been traversed a number of times in my tenure, and it's never. I think maybe context has changed and it might be different now, but it's never got over the line in terms of there's always been a conversation. Both has been for and against, but the against has been, well, how often are these emergencies? Are you creating a war chest based on the rates of people who are here today that won't be used to benefit them? They would have moved on, passed on, etc. by the time the emergency comes around, and your people in the past are paying for the future. I think because of the current context of the increasing frequency, let alone the intensity, that conversation might start to switch. So there is definitely a conversation around, but then it's how much. You don't want to overrate, but how much, as Vicky's already calculated, at the moment it's about 147,000 is each event, but how much do we put in that contingency?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, but I think if in this case, if it's not excessive, I don't know, talking $1, $2 a property, see that as an excessive, but there's funding available if something does go wrong. So yeah, I mean, I know where they're coming from, because otherwise you're theory overrating, but up with the pool would also be, if you ended up with, say, $1 million in the account, well, then maybe you don't need to put that for some mechanism.
Mesh. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Chair. Marish has pretty much touched on what I was going to ask. But that raise, it's really great to hear it. I mean, but you're talking about treading water, and does that raise fill you with the confidence that we'll have enough to do what we need to do? And I'm not worried about having that war chest, because what I've been hearing is that there are certain other things that we could be doing that we don't have the funding for. So I know we will find use for that money. So yes, just are you confident that that raises enough? And I also, reiterate those concerns that I think we could perhaps be.
So yeah, thank you. So in terms of the annual plan, there were things that happened in January, and this is the Regional Council's annual plan of 37,000 to spread water for us. There are some things that happened in January and February after the door had closed for that annual planning, that in hindsight we would have, if it had happened, not in hindsight, if it had happened earlier, the event, asked the Regional Council or asked yourselves to ask the Regional Council to strike an increased rate. So those are things like that hazard research that was talked about. We would have looked some money into that, some early money into that, and also some of the. It's a timing issue that, as you all know from your own annual plans at your own local councils, there's got to be a line drawn somewhere so it can go out to public consultation. All the decisions. The Regional Council's date for that was November, December last year. So these things came to light around the landslip instability and the response costs after those books had been closed.
Councillor Gary.
Representing the rates control team, take that hat off. CDM team. Would it be opportune time right now for this group, this committee, to move a motion in line with what you're saying, Ash, that we investigate adding $1 or $2 or whatever come to, but in the past, we'd had this discussion and public in consultation quite prepared to pay more civil defence, feel safe and know that cavalry is coming. And like I'm the first and others that sit around this table absolutely hammer it home that we've got to keep the rates as high as possible, but we also know that with what's going down now, lately, that civil defence is so important. So if it came to that, I would mention that investigate or guest from regional council an increase in the rates to cover that. And now I don't know what figure you've got in mind, or Julian may have, or Ash may have, but if we formulate that, I'd be cool. That hat on.
Yeah, I think we should do, because it's the same thing, I sit on the regional transport, and I said the other day, we don't have the funding, we spend a lot of time stuff, but can't actually respond because we're hamstrung. And so, like I said, I don't believe it's excessive, and as someone that represents people, if turn around, it's quite easy to defend if I said it's another $1.50, $2 a year, per property, regional rates. I don't think we're going to get too much kickback on that. I don't think that's going to keep people up awake at night. You know what I mean? But I think it is important. I think it would be good as a group of us to put that into the recommendation, and that's what our committee is, to feed it back regional and just see what it's up to them whether they pick it up or decline it. And it's also probably up to them to work on a cap so that all fund doesn't get too big if it's. I don't think it's going to get to that, but if that's probably up to regional councillors to decide if they wanted to put this level, then we'd drop it off for a couple. It'd be easy to do.
Yeah.
Would you like to put some flash words to them?
I'll just, before we do, I think there's really good intention in the room. I think we just need to be mindful of response and readiness as well. And it just would pass over to Julian for comment on the best way to achieve this.
Thank you, Chair. Look, there's part of me going, grab the opportunity, Julian. Grab the opportunity and get about the next conversation that next meeting, take the kick in then. But I'm not going to do that. I'll say to you, this has been, so the LTP business cases, one of them is exactly this. So you've added some real value in terms of some of the things around the capping and some kind of idea around, in that business case, if it gets to X, we stop, but there's things we can put in. Egg have already said to us, they've given us the green light to develop the business. If I was to put that now, I suspect you would go to the regional council and you get fantastic. I'd be doing you a disservice, about 4 or 5 other businesses that when you add them all together, $1 or $2, look at them on the whole, the committee, you might actually turn around and say, we will go through a prioritization matrix and whether it underpins legislation, whether how much community value it adds, what governance value does it add. See that in the whole, so you're making the decision in $4, not more than $1 or $2. The other thing here is everything. KEG might turn around and say, these are the only things that we're putting. I think KEG Chair is probably loud and clear that one of those that you might. But the other thing is, regional council doesn't get to. The regional council has to like this committee asks. That's the current council doing it. It's capping. It puts pressure. Whatever you agree, council has to. So if we wait as a committee say we want $5 per house, that equate, and then that has to go in and cap. In terms of the fact that they have a voice, they don't have. I'd like you to look at that as a whole. Next meeting, and have a thing that we're asking, then consider it in that context, making a decision.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, like Vicky was saying, you know, but I still see it as a separate thing. Because, yeah, I realise. I get. So I still see that as something that as the other. So whether it's, you know, I see it as two.
Basically, they're on the ground.
So I'm just having some messages from those joining online. If we can speak a bit closer to the mic, and Julian, if you can mic closer, that you're apparently cutting in and out. And but Susan would like to make comment in response.
Would like to reinforce there are good. I think it's really important, and we actually have opportunity that are and be able to indeed price. That's why I think business case rest assured, heard loudly and clearly, this group wishes to take into. Therefore, that will be considered, that will be part of the case, so that when it comes back, consider it, all sorts of other readiness and rest assured we are.
Thank you, Susan. Deputy Mayor Grant has been waiting very patiently.
Somewhat patiently. Just like to support what has been out of the discussion, and it feels like it's a discussion that needs time and depth for it. I'd break it into two places. I think annual plan discussion here in regard to this contingency fund, and I'd absolutely support moving on that. To me, it is just a brainer that we actually provide the adequacy of funding response to events. So, question, I think the second one, and that is around the whole approach to the funding of our civil defence operations in Waikato, and the fact that territorial authorities at the moment are carrying a lot of those costs at a level, yet sharing resources with other places. makes me question the value to some of the local ratepayers as to whether that is a balanced approach to it or funding model. So I'd really welcome that discussion around future model and whether the one moment is particularly in an environment where we're seeing increasing utilisation of the us to be head and ready at a regional level to support local territorial authorities. I just wonder whether the current and it worries me as well when I comment about us deferring assessments of major risk issues to be able to meet budgetary requirements. It just doesn't resonate. Value, and I recommend at some point soon discussion around that funding model. Is there a different part of our lead into the LTP discussions?
If I can just add, so essentially, anything that the group wants to go through the WRC plan, the long-term plan, needs to be in November every year. So we're kind of missed mark on that. I can make an action and we can look at bringing it back maybe at the next meeting discussion.
So that's the annual plan.
Sorry,
the annual plan. So my understanding is that boat has sailed and we don't have an opportunity to submit to that. It is the 237,000. It is what it is. Our next opportunity is for when we've got to have it in by the end of July. The long-term plan that will kick in 12 months' time. The contingent.
So I guess we're a bit hamstrung by the timelines of that regional council there. Yeah, I can feel the intent from the room, and I think that message is clear and it's been heard by Chair Susan. Do we need a staff action to investigate when the business cases come back to be able to consider the full options, including contingent?
I think what I've heard is there's a wider the LTP business cases that are being developed as we speak. In terms of one of those is one of those is additional money for science and the research. It doesn't go as far as item. Does not go as far as mitigation, the cost-effective mitigation, bigger conversation. But the research and the contingency planning, definitely. Bit that you're talking about there, Deputy Mayor, is the funding model and the structure. I think that it's within line. It certainly is within scope of the current group plan. I think one of actions that we keep under review is the structure of the group, and the structure is how we're structured, but it's also how we're funded. That wasn't going to be included that wasn't as part of the business case, but if you see, I suppose what you're signaling there is an opportunity to change how we're structured and therefore change how we're funded, which would need to that in the LTP. Have to do a workshop around. So the LTP's thing's an easy one. There's a workshop around the options analysis around structures and the cost analysis that goes with that, and if there's any then submission that needs to go.
Okay. If we move to a work.
So after the meeting, can date if there's availability, and obviously that can go to CDM, then firm a workshop date that will be distributed to what works. Where that can be discussed, I think, in a bit more detail rather than it being put to the side. You can hear people wanting to talk about it.
So is everyone comfortable? Edie?
I'm comfortable there. I don't have anything to add to the discussion, but we've been having discussions at council about attending workshops and meetings home due to travel, and the same apply for this committee.
Yes, you'll get the invite as normal, and you can either attend virtually or in person.
If we don't have any further questions, Ash will move. Station. I'm a seconder. Councillor Marcus. All those in favour say aye. Against. Motion carried unanimously. Move to item 6.6, the group policy and governance document register, and Vicky is here to present. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a for information report, and the attachment outlines policy and governance document register, provides a consolidated view of all the current policies, plans, frameworks, including their scheduled review dates, and the attached register identifies upcoming, deferred or overdue reviews. I do have to note one error, I apologise. There's a correction needed to be made to the attachment, the controllers policy, which was actually last reviewed in November 25, not May 2022, which is in the attachment on page 120. Noting though that the policy will be reviewed again to include any findings from the after action review on significant competency development and capabilities for controllers that may come out of that after action review from recent events. And the report's just presented for governance, visibility and assurance only. There's no decision required.
Do you have any questions? Deputy Mayor Grant?
Just a quick one, the controllers policy, will that incorporate any learnings out of the Coromandel event from January?
Yes. So the next report's actually on the after action review. So yes, any findings that come out of that, all those operational documents will include learnings from those and recommendations for improvement for development.
And March one?
March 1, yes.
Okay. Can I have a mover that the report be received? Councillor Anne-Marie. Seconder. Councillor Deputy Mayor Eugene. All those in favour say aye. Against. Carried unanimously. Item 6.7, the after action review, January to February 2026 severe weather events. I just want to start by giving my condolences to all those affected, especially noting the tragic loss of life in Otorohanga, and everyone who is negatively affected by the states of emergencies across our region, the impact of which will be felt for a very long time. And I really want to acknowledge the work from all our CDM staff, all the volunteers. Many of you would have been personally involved as well, our iwi, our councils, our partner agencies, just for the efforts and commitment you've all shown, particularly given that there were multiple events in quick succession. So the efforts and care demonstrated across the region was deeply appreciated, and I just wanted to note that before the item. So ngā mihi. So I will invite Ian to.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to inform you as the Waikato Civil Defence Group Joint Committee of the planned after action review. See it referred to as AAR throughout the document, and they encompass, or the scope is intended to encompass, the responses to and transitions to recovery for the January and February 2026 severe weather events. So in terms of the question, if I could just go back to Deputy Mayor Grant, if this document, when it goes through, will underpin the review of the policy, such as the controller or recovery manager. However, if you've got, you'll see in a moment, if you've got something from March, from any local review, this regional review won't encompass March, but if you do a local review that you think would, and the findings of that locally would affect or be relevant to the regional documents, we're more than happy to review those regional policy settings against the learnings at TCDC in March. So just for your background, is the after action review policy was adopted back in November 2018, and it created some clear triggers for when an after action review must occur, and the process, and outlines the process for undertaking one. The severe weather events that occurred across the Waikato in January and February of 26 resulted in widespread impacts, as referenced by the chair. Multiple districts, including a tragic fatality in the Otrahonga district. There were multiple local states of emergency declared, and all that background I give you because the triggers for an independent after action review are met. Policy is attached if you wanted to have a look at it. It's a light policy. It's an enabler, not a prescriptor, but yeah, it's given all those circumstances, triggers for an independent after action review are met. So in the policy, there is a basic, this is what you really should, or what we should consider as a terms of reference, what I call foundational level terms of reference. In addition to those foundational terms of reference consideration, CEG, Coordinating Executive Group, has approved additional areas of focus to be incorporated into that independent review. And all CEG members, and therefore by default yourselves, are invited to provide input before the terms of reference are finalised. So again, going back, once you look at the terms of reference, which your full terms of reference or draft ones that your CEG members have got, if there are things that you think are not captured as a council, want those terms of reference amended, then there's a flexibility to do that. And this is to ensure that it's not just a regional review, but it covers the district, city and agency level considerations. So the areas that are particular interest, or maybe particular interest to you as a joint committee, include the clarity, this is what's already drafted in the terms of reference given to KEG, the clarity of the roles and responsibilities across governance, executive and operations during the response and the transition to recovery. And also looks at the regional and local agency responsibilities for public alerting. The latter being very relevant because we changed our policy settings as a region, or we didn't change them, we tightened our policies as a region in the wake of the Auckland anniversary event and the coroner's inquest that we participated in last year, where they talked about the timeliness of warnings and clarity and the use of multiple channels, etc. So it would include that. The other part that you may be interested in is the inclusion and participation of iwi, marae and Maori communities within the regional and local response structures. Then there's the efficacy of the training, induction and experience, not just of our controllers, but of our recovery managers and key personnel. So we had a variety of controllers number of controllers and recovery managers operating in these responses with varying degrees of experience. And I think it would be really good to understand how well enabled they felt the training, or how prepared they were from the training and the experience in the policy settings that
I'll open it for questions. Deputy Mayor Grant.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Julian. I'm just trying to understand whose responsibility is it to sign off on the terms of reference? Is it the KEG, or is it at a governance level that those terms of reference should be set?
Good question. It's been set, as I understand, at KEG. The KEG have set those terms of reference. I'd have to have a look at the policy as to whether that's
Just does
that
feel,
right?
does feel to me, Julian, like a governance.
Any further questions? I just had one. If any committee or elected members wanted to give their feedback as part of the review itself, how can they do that?
So they ultimately, if governors, and I'm sure you will have all been, or many of you will have been in one role or another, involved in the different responses, whether that was at TCDC, Otrahonga, Waikato district. I know there's been multiple different, Manawatu Piako, there were different, in Hauraki, there were different councils operating in different structures about. And if you as governors were involved in that or not involved in that, and you believe you should have been, then you should be participating in that review. And that can be, the structure is still, the structure of the review and how it's done has not been finalized yet. Hence the comment in here, if there's anything that people want adding to the terms of reference, then we can do that. But when I talk about the structure, there's going to be some questionnaires or not anonymous. And then there's going to be some face-to-face interviews. There's going to be reviews of documentation provided. So that's the structure that hasn't yet been nailed until we know what questions, final set of questions are in there. So yes, if members weren't included but felt they should have been, or were included and they've got some observations, then there's an opportunity for joint committee governors to be involved in that. The same as for mayors and other councillors at that local authority level for the but I think there's a fundamental question raised by Deputy Mayor Grant, though, that because you haven't got the full terms of reference that has been provided through KEG in front of, there's a question is, I think the question from the Deputy Mayor Grant is whether it should have been or not. But you can see what's
and
what's
if
in
it
there.
helps, Julian, and my argument is that it's been set by the people who are being reviewed. There isn't any oversight of what terms are for that review. So it just seems to me a governance miss that isn't taking place.
But just to show you that this has not been designed by so KEG are not being reviewed. So there's an argument that KEG are not being, this is an interesting one. KEG are not necessarily being reviewed. They might set the terms of reference. I hear where you're going, but they're not. They didn't have in an emergencies where there's a declared state of emergency. KEG ordinary don't have. Governors do. So it could actually be argued the other side that governors, in terms of joint committee members and mayors, they're the ones who had roles and reviewing themselves, not necessarily KEG as the chief executive. There is no legal operational role for KEG response to the local controllers, or it is to the people with the legislative functions such as mayor, deputy mayor, joint committee chair, etc. That being said, I'm more than happy to look at KEG. I think you should see the full terms of reference. That's probably the easiest way around this, is to share with you the full terms of reference that went to KEG, so you can see it all, and then that still gives you as a council, individual councils, an opportunity to add to in terms of reference and as you see that there might be any gaps, any benefits to be further explored. But I'll take, I'm here to advise, but I'll take your direction.
Which? Councillor Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please, to the terms of reference. As a newbie, and having had that event in Hauraki, I wasn't really sure what my role was, and I was very much kept apart. And I feel like I'm sitting here as a governor, but I don't really know what went on or what the flaws were. And that's a concern. I know I had other elected members of the planning committee meeting saying that they weren't really aware of what was going on or what they should be doing either. And yet we have been given quite a clear steer that there is a role for us. So if I can get that information on where we're not crossing boundaries, but where we can go, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, there is an induction planned for 11th of May, which is exactly for that purpose. But unfortunately, we've had a number of events in between that scheduled date.
So just, look, I've just checked the policy. And he breathes a sigh of relief. Not that I'm saying that we can always change policy, but it does say the KEG will determine how the after action conducted by whom. The policy signed off 2018 does put the mandate with the KEG. But nonetheless, I think there's to making sure that those terms of reference that are still open, flexible, are distributed out.
That we know what we're doing and where we're not supposed to be sticking our nose.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on the action, the program, maybe.
This one does work.
Thank you.
I included the draft agenda in the invite. So, and we're just working on through that now, but I'm rolling through my brain. But a key part of it was your roles and responsibilities and during events, and ending with a open forum, I believe, with learnings from recent events, which would highlight these matters being discussed.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I'll make sure that those terms of reference are out.
Thank you. So I'll move the staff recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Marcus? Those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Okay, we're moving to the NEMA update 6.8 on page 126, and we'll call Matt to the floor. I'd just like to introduce our new NEMA team leader, Andrew. Welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Your members and Chair, thank you. Yes, I was just about to introduce my team leader. First of all, I just want to acknowledge my absence from the December joint committee, and also acknowledge and welcome back those new members just joined us and those returning members. It's great to see you all. My role as a REMA is here to support yourself in your capacity as your joint committee, and also when you need it in an emergency situation. I'm going to be hopefully making visits to your authorities to meet with your mayors over the next months. It's hopefully my intention. So hopefully yourself as well. Chair, just in relation to some updates on my report, just want to go through, I'll take the report as read. Just update on the government reform and the EM bill. The Minister has intended to introduce the EM bill, which will replace the CDEM Act, and this should be coming later on this year. Currently, at the moment in time, the submissions are closed on the 15th of February, and the bill is now being considered by the Governance and Administration Select Committee. The committee is due to report back on the to the House on the 9th of June. So at this moment in time, I can't comment too much on the actual bill until it's gone through those legislative changes. I'm also acutely aware as well that there is interest on the government's announcement on simplifying local government and what this means. I'm pleased, obviously, that the group also submitted a submission to DIA, also in addition to the submission to the EM bill. Just in relation to the government support for mayoral and disaster relief fund, I just want to acknowledge, obviously, all the incredible work that the group and the group office and those TAs that were impacted with these severe weather events in January and February. See a significant amount of work and went with your POCs being operational. The government put in $500,000 as a contribution to your mayoral relief funds, with 200,000 going to TCDC and 100,000 to each to Iraqi, Rotorunga and Waipa. Just also to note for the Waipa, that is just being processed this week for you, with the others already being paid out last month. Just on that, with regards to your training day, I'm more than happy to support you with the group office, giving you some training on the mayoral relief fund as well. I can help that. Also, in addition, the appointment of an Associate Minister, Honourable Chris Pank, has been given that portfolio, emergency management and recovery. So he'll be leading that coordination of the government's response to recent severe weather across the Upper North Island. In addition, I just want to acknowledge that from Bay of Plenty, Mark Crow, who's the regional manager, has just been appointed as the manager of national operations here at NEMA. He starts now at the end of with a wealth of various experience, both in central and local government roles. And lastly, I just want to touch on one of the things that Julian mentioned regarding the EMA. The director issued new guidelines to group managers recently, just reinforcing that use of emergency mobile alert when there is an emergency situation, particularly when there is severe weather events ongoing as well. My update. So, any questions?
For question? I just had a couple. So the first question, on page 1 of your report, the last paragraph notes about the government proposal that emergency management is going to be a regional council function by new combined boards, and that there's a consultation process currently underway. Can you please expand on that a bit more and advise what the implications would be for this joint committee and where consultation is open and who this might have been directed from?
So that is a consultation through the Department of Internal Affairs. It is a local government led through DIA. So unfortunately, I can't comment any further on those requests. But I believe that submission has closed, and I'm also aware that the group has also submitted or made a submission as well in relation to that. So I'm pleased that that has been made.
So you couldn't comment on what?
No, it's not for NEMA's area to comment on. I have provided some feedback already in relation to through to our policy team based on the information that was provided to me from your last joint committee. I've done that already for you.
Thank you. And secondly, just noting our discussions today on government support, and we're thankful very much for the government funding to the mayoral relief funds, but just a bit concerned about the inference on, you know, establishing and sustaining the funds in future. Is there any information?
In relation to the mayoral relief fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I can say is that we are working with central government in relation to the Mayoral Relief Fund going forward. I don't have any more information at this moment in time how that's actually progressing, I'm afraid.
So NEMA are advocating to continue the Mayoral Relief
Yes.
Fund support? Yeah. Councillor Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to pass on our acknowledgement. Thanks from District Council for that Mayoral Relief, because we've gone through all our requests now, and the change that is made to people is significant, and it was really quite a emotional process to go through. We did have 4 people who tried to scam us, who had scammed other councillors as well. So I hope staff are all talking to each other about who those. Just got to be very careful with each claim, but they really were helpful. So
thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, can we have a mover for the staff recommendation to receive the report? Mayor Ash, seconder, Deputy Mayor Edie. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you both. Okay. Now we just need to move to exclude public excluded. I'll move. Deputy Mayor Grant second. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. We'll just give governance a moment to switch over.